Look at this map. Look at the east coast of North Korea. Now look at the west. The west coast, irregular, jagged, islands scattered everywhere, inlets cutting inland, the kind of messy, chaotic coastline you'd expect from millions of years of waves, wind, and time. But the eastern coast, almost perfectly straight, like someone took a ruler and drew it. So who did? Before we answer that, let's make sure you're actually seeing what I'm seeing. Pull up any map of the Korean Peninsula. Political, satellite, topographic, doesn't matter. Look at the two coastlines side by side. The Yellow Sea coast on the west is one of the most complex coastlines in Asia. Thousands of islands, tidal flats that stretch for kilometers, river deltas, fishing bays. It looks like something broke off and shattered into the water. Now look east. The Sea of Japan coast, long, clean, unbroken, a nearly vertical drop from land to water, running almost exactly north to south for hundreds of kilometers. In geography, we call this a concordant coastline, where the land runs parallel to the sea, and the reason it exists here is actually buried underground. But, and this is the part that gets interesting, the geology only explains part of the story, because the line on the map is even straighter than the land itself. Running down the spine of the Korean Peninsula is a mountain range called the Taebaek Mountains. These aren't gentle rolling hills. This is a hard ancient fault system where the eastern edge of the Korean landmass was literally cracked and tilted. The western side slopes gradually toward the Yellow Sea. The eastern side, it drops sharply, almost like a wall. On the eastern face of the Taebaek Range, you go from mountain peaks to sea level in a matter of kilometers. There's almost no coastal plain. The cliffs don't gradually become a beach. They just end in water. This kind of coastline, controlled by an underlying fault rather than carved by erosion, tends to run straight because the fault itself is a straight crack in the Earth's crust. You see the same thing along parts of the Norwegian coast, the coast of Baja California, the Red Sea's eastern shore. So, the geology gave Korea a naturally straighter eastern edge than western edge. That's real, that matters. But here's the thing. Geology doesn't draw lines on maps. People do. The year is 1910. Japan annexes Korea, formally, completely, brutally, and immediately begins doing what every colonial power does when it takes new territory. It maps everything. The Japanese Imperial Land Survey deployed across the Korean Peninsula and began one of the most systematic triangulation mapping projects in Asian colonial history. Now, triangulation surveys, the method used at the time, work by establishing a network of precise measurement points, then calculating distances and angles between them. It's the same technique used to map India under the British and to map Africa under the French. But the Japanese weren't just making tourist maps. They were building military infrastructure. The east coast of Korea was strategically critical. Japan needed it as a supply corridor to Manchuria, to Russia's border, to the resource-rich interior of the continent. So Japanese engineers surveyed the east coast with extraordinary precision. They built the Hamgyong railway line, running the entire length of the eastern coast, which required exact geodetic data for tunnels, bridges, and mountain passes. They developed port cities, Wonsan, Chongjin, Rajin, each one mapped to the meter for military logistics and naval access. And here's what that means for our straight coastline. The natural geology gave Korea a straight eastern edge. The Japanese colonial surveys formalized that edge, locked it into coordinate grids, expressed it in precise latitudes and longitudes, and embedded it into maps that would last for a century. Japan didn't draw a straight coastline, but they were the first to draw the coastline straight. August 1945, Japan surrenders, World War II ends, and Soviet Red Army troops pour into northern Korea from Manchuria, moving fast. Within days, they control everything north of the 38th parallel. And they inherit everything Japan left behind: the factories, the railways, the ports, and the maps. Soviet military cartographers, working under Soviet military intelligence, were legendary for their precision. The Soviet General Staff maps produced through the Cold War are some of the most accurate and detailed maps ever made. They covered every corner of the world, including territory the Soviets had never physically visited. But for Korea, they had the Japanese survey data as a foundation. The Soviets adopted the Japanese geodetic system, updated it with their own measurements, and produced military-grade maps of northern Korea that would form the cartographic basis of the new state. When the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was founded in 1948, it didn't need to survey its own coastline. It already had decades of Japanese precision, refined by Soviet engineering, handed to it on a plate. Here's what makes this even more striking. Compare how the 38th parallel, Korea's famous dividing line, was drawn to how the East Coast was drawn. The 38th parallel was decided in August 1945 by two American colonels, working in 30 minutes, using a National Geographic magazine map bought from a Washington newsstand. They picked the 38th parallel because it looked roughly in the middle, and they needed to divide occupation zones before the Soviets got too far south. 30 minutes, a magazine map. Meanwhile, the east coast of North Korea represents 35 years of Japanese military surveying, refined by Soviet cartographic intelligence. Two colonels with a magazine on one side, decades of precision engineering on the other. That's how Korea's borders were made. Now here's the part nobody talks about. The same geology that made North Korea's east coast straight, mountains that drop hard into the sea, no beaches, no easy landing points, makes it one of the most strategically defensible coastlines in the world. There's almost nowhere to land troops from the sea. The cliffs and the terrain make eastern approaches extremely difficult. And just behind that wall of mountains, that's where North Korea built its most sensitive military infrastructure. The Tonghai satellite launching ground sits right on the east coast in a valley tucked behind the mountain wall. It's the site from which North Korea has launched most of its long-range missile tests directly east over the Pacific. The Sinpo Naval Base further south is home to North Korea's submarine program, including the submarines believed capable of launching ballistic missiles. And the Punggiri nuclear test site, where North Korea conducted all 6 of its known nuclear tests, sits inside the same eastern mountain complex. The cliff coast that Japanese engineers surveyed for railways, North Korea uses for secrecy. The same mountains that gave Korea a straight line on a map give North Korea a curtain behind which to hide its weapons. So, why does North Korea have a perfectly straight east coast? 3 reasons, layered on top of each other like geological strata. First, fault tectonics. The Taebaek Mountains cracked the peninsula asymmetrically hundreds of millions of years ago, giving the east a steep, clean drop into the sea. Second, Japanese colonialism. 35 years of military survey work formalized that natural straightness into precise cartographic coordinates that have never been revised. Third, Soviet inheritance. When Japan left and the Soviets arrived, they adopted those maps wholesale, passing them to the DPRK as the cartographic foundation of a new state. And the result? A country that looks on the map like someone drew its eastern border with a ruler, and behind that ruler straight line, mountains, secrecy, submarines, and nuclear tests. Here's the thing about maps that I want you to carry with you. Every line, every border, every coast, every boundary was drawn by someone at some point in history for a reason that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with power. The next time a coastline looks natural, ask who surveyed it. The next time a border looks arbitrary, ask who drew it and when. Because on this planet, nothing on a map is an accident.